Please remember to like, subscribe, and rate on your favorite podcast platform.
Trigger warning. This podcast contains discussion of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, and includes explicit language. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
I guess when I look at the four of us here, and we all are so maybe visually different, but we're coming together in this wonderful way where we really understand one another, where we feel really connected by the strings between our hearts, that other survivors will be so fortunate, as are the four of us here, to find solace, to find strength, to find comfort in one another. And that's my hope.
As we've been living our lives, sexual violence has been taboo to talk about. That's no longer the case. And so I'm very hopeful that the sheer volume of survivors and the power of the voices of survivors speaking up now means that we will have mechanisms of accountability at some point in the near future.
Without healing, traumatic experiences can have an enormous impact on defining who we are and who we will become.
Wade Robson and myself, James Safechuck, are both survivors of childhood abuse. In this podcast, we're talking with survivors, trauma specialists, and advocates,
highlighting the many resources available in order to inspire the brave steps to starting or continuing the healing journey.
This is From Trauma
to Triumph. What's up, guys, and welcome to our podcast, From Trauma to Triumph, with myself, Wade Robson, and James Safechuck. Today, we're honored to share with you a conversation we had with two powerful people, Lili Bernard and Dr. Caroline Heldman. Lili Bernard is a Cuban-born visual artist, actor, writer, and activist. She's exhibited her artwork in numerous galleries and institutions, and her work examines the issues of sexism and racism, past and present. Her acting credits include guest starring roles on Seinfeld, Stephen King's miniseries Golden Years, along with many others. Lili is also a Bill Cosby sexual assault survivor, whom she met while guest starring on The Cosby Show. Lili has been and continues to be a powerful advocate and pioneer for survivors of sexual assault.
Dr. Caroline Heldman is the executive director of the Representation Project and chair of the Critical Theory and Social Justice Department at Occidental College in Los Angeles. Her research specializes in media, the presidency, and systems of power. Dr. Heldman has been published in the top journals in her field and has published 6 books, including co-authoring Rethinking Madame President, Are We Ready for a Woman in the White House? Caroline is also a survivor of sexual assault.
In this conversation, we discuss what Lili and Caroline refer to as the survivor siblinghood, as well as healing from trauma, activism, society's objectification of women, and much more. We hope you guys enjoy. So excited that both of you are here, and we reached out to Lili, and Lili, one of your first responses after being very sweet and honored and excited and saying you wanted to be a part of it, one of the next things that came out of you was, it would be really wonderful if we could do this with Caroline. And then James and I learned, as much as we could about Caroline, which is amazing stuff to learn. So maybe we could begin, and I don't know, maybe whoever wants to answer first, and you can both answer, but just curious about how you guys met and the nature of your relationship, maybe how it started, what it is now.
This survivor siblinghood is the sweetest thing that has come out of this unfortunate trauma. And Caroline represents that. You two represent that. I told you before, James, that when I saw you on that Oprah interview, I felt like I was looking at a mirror.
Yeah.
All your body languages, your nuances, your facial expressions, the way you were emoting, everything, the cadence of your breath was like, wow, it's like I'm looking at a mirror. I mentioned that to Caroline, and that's what it's like for me being around Caroline. So it was a mutual friend named Roger Gilmore Smith. He's a phenomenal actor. You've seen in a lot of movies, including Spike Lee movies. And I was at that point still too terrified to speak out about the Cosby trauma that I suffered publicly. At the time that it occurred, I told a number of people, including my agent at the time, best friends, of course, the psychiatrists and psychologists with whom I spoke at the hospital in the wake of the trauma. And but speaking publicly is something else. And Bill Cosby had very clearly stated certain things that he would do to me if I did speak out publicly. And I reasonably perceived those things to be death threats. He said things to me like, I will erase you. All it takes is one phone call. You better watch your back.
Yeah.
He said that he would blacklist me from the industry, and I was an up and coming artist. So I had a career that I had invested in, I had to protect. Those were some of his threats. He also told me I didn't exist. So I was really terrified for my life. I feared for my life, and I thought I would never speak publicly about it. And then my friend Roger Gilmore Smith was encouraging me and talking to me about the power of speaking out. And by that time, maybe 47 of the 64 of us who had spoken public had already spoken out. And I told him the only way I would consider speaking out is if maybe my voice could help do something to change these ridiculous laws, these statute of limitations, these arbitrary time limits that prevent us rape survivors from seeking justice, both criminally and civilly. And he says, you gotta meet my friend Caroline Heldman. She's working on that right now. She wants to abolish the statute of limitations. So I didn't even know who she was. I was in a very highly traumatized state at that time because of the recurrence of the Cosby trauma. I was back into what they call the perseverating PTSD state. I just couldn't function. But then, in the midst of all of this, Roger's like, you got to talk to my friend Caroline. And I was like, really terrified. I was like, okay, maybe I can do something if I speak out. Maybe I can, as your podcast is called, transform my trauma into triumph for other people. And then, so I got into a phone call with Caroline. And the very first thing I asked her was, what, Caroline?
The first thing you asked me is whether or not I was a survivor. And I told you that I was a few times over. And so that was the way we connected. And then the next stage was Lili came to a meeting where we were organizing around trying to abolish the time limit for prosecuting rape and sexual assault in California. And Lili brought her firstborn, Rafa, who ended up naming the campaign, which was the End Rape Statute of Limitations campaign in California. Quite a mouthful, but we had a hashtag. And then Lili and I grew quite close. She was one of the co-organizers. So it was Lili and LGBTQ plus Lavender Menace activist Ivy Bottini, who has since passed on. So the three of us managed this campaign in California, and that meant multiple trips up to Sacramento to do lobbying, to testify before various committees. We did the messaging, phone trees, and we took these great road trips together. And the two of us have been in the trenches for that campaign and for a number of other campaigns since. So Lili is, I wouldn't say a reluctant activist, but I don't think you thought of yourself as an activist until now, although I will say you've been an activist probably your whole life because your art is activism. And you have been speaking out about the injustices of sexual violence and racial violence through your artwork for decades. And so I think it was just a matter of Lili getting into another kind of activist space. And she is an incredible leader in that space.
Oh, I want to piggyback on that. Thank you, Caroline. Part of the activism that I also did in my art career, because I have an acting career and a visual art career, is organizing Black artists, right? So I founded a couple of, collaboratives for artists of color. One was Habla, Harvesting Asian Black Latina Artists, and the other one is Baila, Black Artists in Los Angeles. But I was used to organizing and doing activism in the realm of people of color, right? Trying to create platforms where the world could find out about our great art. But this was a different thing because being an activist for anti-rape is actually against the status quo of all the cultures that I represent, because I'm a mixed human being. I am African, I am Latina, I am Asian and European, but particularly of those first groups that I mentioned, the groups of color being Black, Latin, and Asian, it's against the status quo for us to speak out against our sexual oppressors. It's just against it, and it's for very good reason. So it's very seldom that you find a Black woman, a Latina woman, an Asian woman actually, speaking out and lobbying to really end this sexual oppression. But so that was different for me. I was surrounded by mostly white women. And then my son, Raphael, who was 17 at the time that he started working with End Rape SOL, he's a very dark-skinned Black man. And I want to say that if I could segue really right here to YouTube, one of my sons just acted as the principal lead actor, the hero character of a TV commercial for a very major product. And he has been doing principal work in TV commercials since he was 11. He's now 20. No, since he was 9, excuse me. He's now 20. He's been doing this for 11 years. He was sexually harassed on set last week. And it blew his mind. He just came home so upset. And in all the 11 years that he's been doing this, and that my other children have been principal actors on commercials, this has never, ever, ever happened. And it was interesting that although it was, of course, not as intense as what happened to me and Caroline as survivors of sexual assault, he was really clearly sexually harassed, and it was so upsetting. And so I say this because I have so much empathy for the two of you as male survivors of sexual assault, particularly childhood sexual assault, what that means for you. And I think if you have to compare that, maybe it's even a greater burden than what women carry because of all the stigma in society about what manhood means.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Lili.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's different. I don't know if it's greater. Women have their own, women have their own struggles. So, but it is different. I had one question, Lili, because you were talking about the activism that you were doing before you came out. Do you think that stemmed from your early trauma, or was that something inherent in you beforehand?
Totally. As Caroline mentioned, I'm also an artist who has made art about these violent acts against women for decades before I ever spoke out. So, yeah, I'm also a survivor of childhood abuse, not sexual childhood abuse, but really life-threatening emotional and physical childhood abuse. But absolutely, my artwork is about violence and trauma because it's like really the foundation upon which our nation lies. There's just like violence is a really big part of our American culture. And H. Rap Brown, the Black Panther, said that violence is American as cherry pie. I made an art about that violence is as American as cherry pie. And what I've learned in my reluctant, would say I am a reluctant activist with regard to anti-rape activism, because it's very painful. It's very difficult for us to be doing this, right? To have to contend with the memories that resurface when we're doing this.
Yeah.
Now, what I found, unfortunately, in this reluctant anti-rape activism or anti-sexual assault activism is that sexism is much more tolerated than is racism. Absolutely.
What I imagine, but what, if any, role do you feel your art has played in your healing journey?
My painting in particular, I'm an interdisciplinary visual artist, but painting in particular is like the most soothing thing for me. It's like the antithesis of what violence, against the body is, whether it's sexual violence or other kind of violence. Like the paintbrush is soft and it's smooth and it's gentle and it's flowing. And I get to look at beautiful colors and it's a very intimate moment. So for me, painting is just like a really healing moment. I don't know if I would really be able to have survived all the trauma that I have gone through in my life were it not for my work. Is that the truth for you guys too?
Yes, absolutely. But it kind of took me a while to realize it because in my breakdowns, which led to me coming forth about the abuse, what also coincided with that, like you, was that my art was so connected to my abuse experience. So it all got painted black for me for a while. My relationship with art and dance and music and film, I shunned it all because it was all directly correlated to abuse for me. So there was this gap where I kind of tried to push all of that away for 4 or 5 years while I just focused on inner work. And then thankfully, I was able to make space again for all of that to come back into my life and to rebuild my relationship with art in a whole new way. And then it's become so obvious that it's such a huge part of my healing journey now. And then I'm now able to look back and see the role that art played along the entire journey. And even though I didn't know that it was playing that role, that healing role, Caroline, what about you with art in your life and that playing a role in your healing?
It's definitely played a role. And I would add martial arts into that too. I don't know how many of you have some outlet where, the music is definitely an outlet, but also, kicking and punching things is an outlet.
Yeah, I can relate to that. What martial arts did you do?
My highest rank is in Taekwondo, but Aikido, Kajikimbo, just the physical outlet for a lot of the pain and the rage that comes up, whether you acknowledge it as sexual violence or not, and whether or not you would acknowledge that you're a survivor, right? The body still knows.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You need somewhere for that energy to go, hopefully somewhere healthy, right? Thinking about Lili and Caroline, the experience of survivors such as us of abuse and isolation, how isolating it can be, mostly is. So Lili, if I start with you, it's kind of a broad question, but just speaking to your experience, post the abuse from Cosby, or maybe it's earlier, right? You mentioned child abuse and that sort of thing. Just what your experience of isolation has felt like, and maybe that leads to, what we started talking about, this sisterhood, right? This maybe moving out of more and more isolation.
Well, I can say confidently that the Cosby trauma is by far like the worst trauma that I endured in my life, because it so occupies my mind in terms of PTSD. So for me, the isolation comes in triggering moments, really relative to the violence I've suffered from Bill Cosby. Some trigger moments for PTSD for me are at night, right? Because he drugged me and raped me on 2 occasions at night. And there's a bed involved, right? And on one occasion, when I was screaming no and stop and help, and he covered my mouth with his hand to silence my screams, and then he actually pushed a pillow in my face. This is just trigger warning. Am I not supposed to be talking about these details?
No, we have explicit on there, so you can talk about it.
Okay.
Well, whatever you're comfortable with. We don't want to force you to.
Okay, so at that moment when he was pushing a pillow in my face to silence my screams, and my body was rendered totally incapacitated because of the drugs that he somehow surreptitiously slipped in. He slipped it into my sparkling apple cider. That's what he did. But I couldn't move. My body was like a noodle, like spaghetti. It was paralyzed, limp, and so I really thought at that moment that I was going to die of suffocation by this mega celebrity who had been acting as my father figure mentor, telling my parents and me that he loved me like I was his daughter, and that he was going to look out for my career, and he cared for me. And here I am, I'm going to get killed by this man. And it was so difficult. So for me, isolation comes when I'm sleeping in my bed and there's a pillow, and I have to contend with these things, this pillow that triggers me. And then I wake up in these night terrors where I'm reliving the suffocation. I can't breathe. Yeah. Isolation for me also comes when I'm driving on the freeway. The incident I talked about with the suffocation of the pillow occurred in Las Vegas. The suffocation pillow incident occurred in Las Vegas, but in Atlantic City was the first time he drugged me and raped me. And after that, the morning after, it was still like dawn, and I was still groggy, and he was helping me put on my clothes because I had a theater gig. I performed in this like a social theater company called Plays for a Living, where we went to halfway houses and schools and summer camps to perform these socially relevant plays. I played this teenager, a struggling teenager, and I had to do that in the morning. And I was drugged still, and he had just raped me, and it was very confusing and cognitive dissonance galore. And then he put me in this car with this very loquacious, like Italian or something, cab driver who was just crazy excited to see Bill Cosby putting me in this car. It was a black car that he had ordered to take me back. He put me on the New Jersey Turnpike. And if you know the trip from Atlantic City, New Jersey to where I lived in New York City, in Manhattan, it was about maybe 2.5 hours long or something. It was like a freeway. So whenever I'm on the freeway, and Caroline knows that, that's a very, like, the isolation comes big time, because the freeway being, on a moving fast thing, it just like brings me right back to when I was in this horrible drug state of just having been, drugged and raped by my mentor. And now I'm on this New Jersey Turnpike for 2.5 hours. Like, what the F just happened? I have to perform now. And so even to this day, so many, years later, I'm terrified driving on the freeway. I start hyperventilating. I get panic attacks. The isolation comes, like, all of a sudden I can't hear. I have to work really hard to regulate my breath, because my fingers can turn into like claws from the hyperventilation. One time in 2018, I think it was, right before going to the Cosby sentencing hearing, like the day before I was driving, I had just come off the freeway, and I didn't realize that I was already entering a panic attack. And all of a sudden my fingers start, curling up like claws, and I can't breathe. And I had to pull over really quickly, and a cop comes, and he finds me in this terrified state, where I'm like, and lady, you just made an illegal turn. And I'm like, and I can't talk. And he's got his hand on his holster, and he's like, give me your registration. I couldn't even get the registration. And so finally I was able to get the police officer to call my therapist, who got on the speakerphone, who put me through all this like meridian tapping thing on my face to bring me back into 2018 and to say, hey, look. And the cop went from saying, lady, if you don't cooperate, I'm going to take you to the jail right now, to, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to take you to the hospital? But that's what isolation looks like for me. And when you see us in these very functional states, we're well-spoken, we're smiling, we do art, we public speakers, but the isolation comes in these moments of PTSD that you would never know how much we suffer. It's real and it's tremendous. And you know it, James. I saw you on stage in Oprah fighting that experience. I saw that in you. I said, oh my God, I hope he doesn't break into a panic attack right now, because he looks the way I do, when I'm trying to fight that. So my question to you would be, what does isolation look like? What did isolation look like to you guys on that stage with Oprah? I mean, even though you're in a public forum, isn't it like this moment of isolation?
That day in particular was very overwhelming. I mean, just talking to Oprah is not something you can prepare for in front of an audience full of survivors as well. So there was a lot going on that day. And also doing interviews, just kind of speak to that, having to go back and talk about your trauma. I knew I had a day's worth of interviews, but I just wasn't mentally prepared for them to go, tell us about your abuse, like walk me through it. I'm like, wait, what? Oh man, wait, I gotta, a day of revisiting your trauma, right? Having to walk through it over and over again is tough. I wasn't prepared for that, even though logically you'd think I should have been.
Well, James, as someone who works with lots of public survivors, one of the key things we say is boil down your experience to 2 or 3 sentences. It can no longer hurt you. So I don't think you can mentally prepare for a day of organically talking about your sexual experiences of sexual violence.
I didn't have that. I was just like,
I know, I wish I would have known
me to walk it. I remember sitting there going like, I gotta do what? Yeah, but I should have been, it would have been nice to have like those in my head. I was like I started revisiting it. And I don't know if Wade, you noticed, I was just like, I'd look over to you or something. You're like, help, Wade.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a couple things there. I mean, for myself and James, I think you and I both maybe had our own versions of this, but, and I know that both of you, Caroline and Lili, can relate to this as well, that up until that moment of the documentary film being released and doing that interview in that day with Oprah, I was so used to getting, 90, what felt like at least 95% negative reaction to talking about this truth, right? To talking about Michael and in this way as an abuser and all of that, and death threats and all of the things that I know, that you have dealt with as well. And then, so when both of us, and we talked about this later, going into doing the film and then getting ready for the film to be released, it was just kind of like, well, most likely we're just going to be dragged through the streets again, right? It's just going to be that same thing. And so I was just trying to prepare myself for that. And
we were,
go ahead.
We were backstage when it premiered, when the movie premiered, and we were going to go up and do a little interview. We thought we were going to go get attacked.
Yeah.
Like we were just backstage going, all right, you ready to do this? We're looking at each other. We're like, all right, let's go out. Let's go get attacked. Let's just get through this. Let's do it. And we went out there and people were clapping. And I remember one of the first guys who came up, he says, I'm a lawyer. And I was like, all right, here we go. I'm about to get drilled, by a lawyer. And he was positive about it. And you'll see these smiles on our faces, and it's partial, just like shock smiles of like, I didn't get what was going on at all. Yeah. It took it to after for us to go, wait, what just happened?
When I wrote a note to my wife and son, because we were out of town at Sundance to do this premiere. Before the premiere, there was just in case something happened to me. I mean, that was the place I was going into the premiere with, because there was threats. There was like a bomb threat sort of thing at the theater, and cops were sweeping it all before, and so that was the energy we were ready for. And then it was so disarming and ultimately beautiful, but so disarming in the moment to have, at least in that experience, in that premiere, like felt like 100% support and people crying in the audience and connecting. And I came back to the hotel right after the premiere, and the second that I closed the door, I just collapsed in tears. I just didn't know what to do with this support. Really.
I didn't know how to process. Looking back, I wish I could have absorbed it better, but I was just like kind of in shock. Was not expecting any kind of support.
And I want to say that speaks so loudly to me, because now you're contending with the fear that you have of the public reaction, and then you have the fear that you contend, like you say, in isolation in your private moments. For me, another private moment is taking showers. It's really difficult for me to take showers because after incidences, both the drugging and raping in Atlantic City and Las Vegas, Bill Cosby washed me. So that's a really difficult moment. But when you're talking about the fear of your private, moments of difficulty, and that compared to what the public might do, it's great. So it takes tremendous courage, as to be able to walk through all that fear, whether it's the PTSD triggers and isolation, or having to contend with the fear of how the public is going to react. It's really, really real, and it lends to why many rape survivors, we deny what happens to us. We don't want to have to contend to all the blaming and the shaming. Right now, I'm taking care of a teenage childhood rape survivor whom I've known since she was a baby. And it's a family member, an adult family member, who did this to her. And in her first police report, she was just denying everything because she was conditioned by him to protect him. Because if she did speak out, this would happen to her. This horrible thing would happen to her. So having to contend with the blaming and the shaming or the reaction is a really big factor in why we don't speak out, in why we deny what happened to us until we're ready and strong enough to do that. I receive a lot of death threats and rape threats from Bill Cosby fans. But when I made an artwork in which I put images of Michael Jackson and R. Kelly alongside with Bill Cosby as different types of sexual predators, hebephiles, pedophiles, etc., I received so much more hatred and so many more death threats and rape threats from Michael Jackson fans than I did from Bill Cosby fans. And the death threats I received from Bill Cosby fans are great. They still occur to this day. So I don't know how you guys contend with the Michael Jackson fans. It's this idolatry is just, it's crazy. I don't know how you do it.
They are intense.
Quite intense.
Yeah. They're really intense. I'm still trying to get used to it. And it took a long time.
One of them was coming to my door and leaving stuff at the end of the driveway that was scaring my children for like a period of 5 days, leaving this different liquid with bubbles in it and different vessels and stuff. And one day I just left something back there, like a little, Orisha voodoo stuff around it. I got a dead bird and left it there, and I kind of scared their asses. They didn't come back. But I did have to file a police report for that one with the LAPD, because it came the same time that someone was saying, a Michael Jackson fan was saying online that she was going to find me. She knows where I live, and she was going to do all this horrible thing to me, including raping and killing and really bad words.
Yeah, that's
so horrible.
That's a whole nother conversation around that kind of behavior by people. But I want to go back to one thing that you're talking about, Lili, which was, you're making the point of how difficult it is for survivors to speak out. We may seem like now, we're talking about it and we're okay, but behind the scenes, it does take its toll on you. And you get out of talking about it and you're alone, and it all comes back to you. So it is difficult. But I want to kind of relate that to what you gain by having this siblinghood, right? Like these resources that weren't available to you beforehand. So it is really difficult, but you have these survivors and you have these people that understand what you're going through. And oftentimes with them, you don't even have to say anything. Or if you say something, one of the great things is, when you're talking with just survivors and you say something, you're like, if anybody else heard that, they would have no idea what I'm talking about, or they would judge me or, something like that. But I'm like, okay, this survivor is not going to be judging me. They completely get it. Yeah. And it's having these resources of people that understand what you've gone through and the pain that you've gone through and that are there for you.
Yes. So just one important note about language. We did used to call it the survivor sisterhood. And now we call it, of course, the survivor siblinghood, because men and non-binary folks are certainly targets of sexual violence. And it's incredible to see everyone coming together. And James, as you pointed out, prior to the campus anti-rape movement that starts in 2013 and gets the public thinking about this, and then Cosby survivors start being believed, and then the women of Fox News come out and they start being believed, and then it snowballs into the Me Too movement, the online activism in 2017, and then R. Kelly and Weinstein and all of these other predators are finally being held accountable, even though frankly we've known about this for 2 decades. Michael Jackson, we've known about this for just many, many years. Now the network can come together. We can support each other, and through media training or something like this. I'm showing up for Lili today because Lili is it's hard for Lili to talk about what she's experienced, and I'm here, I have her back, right? And so a lot of us in the siblinghood show up for each other's, let's call them events, whether it's a deposition, a court hearing, an important interview, a podcast, a radio show, a TV show, whatever it is, we show up and have each other's backs. And during trials, I think it's especially important just having people there. So Judy Huth is sitting in the courtroom about a month ago in Los Angeles, over in Santa Monica, the Superior Court. And who does she see? She looks out and she sees all of these women. She doesn't know who we are necessarily, but she knows we're survivors. And we had a number of survivors who have not gone public yet, who were sitting in those rows. And we're there not to do anything except be present to witness that. And at the Cosby trial, I have reason to believe that Mr. Cosby had hired people to harass us. And I say this because one of the people from his team was seen giving money to a variety of different people, all of whom had been harassing us throughout the day. But we've been harassed for, at the first trial and the second trial, we were harassed every single day. And by harassed, I mean terrible things whispered in our ears. I had my rib bruised because one of the Cosby probably shills, pushed my bag into me. They sit on books, they sit up tall so that we can't see what's happening in the courtroom. Outside of the courtroom, it's a constant beeline to harass us, to yell, to get in our faces. And so what ended up happening quite a bit is the content of the trial and the harassment from the likely Cosby shills meant that a lot of survivors who were there got triggered. And so Jennifer Storm, who is a survivors advocate in the state of Pennsylvania, and myself were pretty regularly supporting survivors who were dissociating, who were having very strong emotional responses to what was happening. And a lot of it was, whatever they needed, right? Back rubs, or I don't know how many of you use the frozen orange technique, or just something that,
I don't know that.
So when someone's dissociating, I have frozen oranges in my fridge, and it works without them being frozen. But what it does is if you put it in the hand of someone who's dissociating, they can feel it, right? And it brings them out because of the cold. If you peel it, then the smell will sometimes bring people back. And so it's having a very intense sensory experience, whatever you can do to create that. It doesn't have to be frozen orange. And Jennifer Storm and I were just, constantly strategizing about how to best support survivors who were dissociating. And I think this idea, as you're pointing out, the courage that it takes to come forward, but this idea that folks are okay. Nobody is okay going through a rape trial. Nobody is okay as a survivor reading about a rape trial or watching a rape trial, because we've all experienced, the stigmatization. We've all experienced this idea that, rape is the only crime where we put the victim on trial. And it comes at great personal cost. And that's the thing. There's so many survivors I talk to who, want to take a hold of that courage and come forward. And I say, well, okay, you are essentially throwing yourselves on the shoals. It will certainly help other survivors, but are you going to get justice? Probably not. Is it going to come at a huge personal cost? Absolutely. So there's any survivor who's hearing this who feels like it's compulsory, like they have to come forward in order to be a real survivor or be really courageous. You have no obligation to sacrifice your personal life for a larger social movement.
And Caroline is saying this herself as a survivor of a horrendous raping, including childhood raping. And so she, to me, such a role model of this resilience, but it definitely is a self-sacrificing thing to do.
So important for people to understand that people who aren't survivors and most importantly, survivors that this is not, there's no responsibility here of what one has to do. Right. Caroline, I'm curious from your personal experiences of abuse and that sort of transition, if that's the word I can use, transition from those experiences into, getting involved in this work, just sort of how that happened for you, feeling compelled to get involved as an activist in this realm.
I didn't get involved as an activist until I was an adult. I don't know how many of you, maybe all of us here, have had this experience where, because prior to Me Too, because rape was such a hidden crime and one we didn't take seriously, I didn't acknowledge myself as a rape survivor until, well into adulthood. My first rape happened, Michael, a neighbor, I was 4 years old. It was violent. My sister had to burst into a bathroom and pull him off of me. And then when I told my mom about it, she beat me. And so there was no way I was going to come forward about this. Right. And then another common thing that happens, I think, is rape is so, sexual violence and rape are so normal in our society. We just don't take it seriously, right? As in any way, we don't hold folks accountable who do it. And it's all, we boil it down into these experiences where it's just one person's opinion against another, like anyone's going to come out and say, I'm a rape survivor, when it immediately, brands them as being a victim in a way that's really negative. So I actually forgot about one of my sexual violations from a guy I went to college with. I don't know how many. I mean, isn't that a strange thing to say? Oh yeah, I forgot about that one rape, because it's so common. But I didn't start getting involved in it, the activism, until I was a resident director at Rutgers University at Cook College, and I was adjudicating rapes on campus, and I realized this is happening all the time. No one's calling the police. Should they call the police? Probably not. They're not going to get any justice, and they're going to go through what's been termed a second rape by Susan Estrich, who talks about the terrible process of going to law enforcement. And 1% of rapists are ever going to see a day in a jail cell. And is that really the option? No. A good option for survivors? No. And so what's happening on campus? Well, I mean, folks are getting book reports in response to raping people. They're getting suspended for a semester, and then they're coming back and likely engaging in rape again. So it was from that perspective, the campus perspective, that I started to see what was happening, and really couldn't do much until I was in a position of power later on as a young faculty member. And in 2011, I went into my college president and said, look, we're going to launch a national social movement. We have an epidemic of a problem. We have social media, which we've never had before. We're going to reach a wide audience. We're going to use federal Title IX complaints to put this on the public's agenda. We mapped it all out, 2011. And I said to him, you can either be on the cutting edge of this, and we specifically said we're going to start with colleges and universities, because if we can get the public to care about rape survivors on college campuses, then we will set the bar for how we will do this activism in the broader culture. And I said to my college president, you're either going to be, on the cutting edge here, or you're going to get steamrolled by a social movement that's coming. And I put some of this in an email, and I look back on it now, because that's exactly what happened. Of course, how could we have known? We were just a ragtag group of a couple faculty members and students who were who were very planfully saying, we're going to put this on the public's agenda. And sure enough, for the very first time, a few years later, after all, a slew of federal complaints where we're hive minding it, and we're using, all this new technology at the time, Google Documents, we could share Google Docs, we could talk to each other with our cell phones pretty easily. All this technology and social media allowed us to coalesce as a movement in a way that we couldn't in the early 90s. So I was a part of the early 90s campus anti-rape movement that was, went away pretty quickly with the backlash. We learned from that. We learned from other forms of activism, and we put it in place. And I will say, we watched it unfold in a way, beyond our wildest dreams in terms of effectiveness. We watched public opinion all of a sudden get far more interested in this than the topic than they have been ever since we've been polling. And just, based on public opinion, and also based on the number of articles written about it. And then we started to see some shifts in the public's ideas about rape myths. And so when, Alyssa Milano used the hashtag #MeToo, referencing a term that Tarana Burke had used 10 years prior, right? When that all came together, that was actually more than a decade worth of work to make sure that the public was ready for it. And I know that doesn't quite get at your question, but I got to say, I was reluctant. I live in a rape culture. I know what that means. I know what the backlash means. And anyone who's going to act like we can just come forward and not pay any professional or personal cost is, delusional.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if you could speak too about this. Makes me think about this, the cultural sexual objectification of women that makes sexual violence against women like okay. I don't know if that's the right word or what right way to phrase it, but it makes sort of like sets it up to make that okay. And then also it sets it up to make the women feel responsible for that sexual violence against them.
That's such a great question, James. One of the roots of sexual violence, I think, is the viewing women as sex objects, right? So we're raised in a culture, and this sounds prudish, but it's actually a radical feminist critique, right? Which is when we're raised in a culture where girls and women are taught that their primary value comes from their bodies and how sexy they can appear to other people. When that is the worth of a girl or a woman, then we live in a culture that accepts and normalizes sexual objectification. And the problem with being a sex object is we think in binaries, right? So this is the subject-object binary. Subjects act and objects are acted upon. So if you're told that your primary worth and what you should be aiming for, your value comes from being a sex object, even the most valuable sex objects are still objects. They're still acted upon by agents. So it robs you of agency. It robs you of humanity. And dehumanization, as we know, is always the first step. The dehumanization of a group is always the first step in engaging in violence against that group. So I think there's two primary themes that are happening right now in the United States. Women are being valued as breeders. We're being reduced to our bodies and our ability to breed. And that and sexual violence and all of these other terrible things that are happening to women can really, a root cause there is because we fundamentally do not view girls and women as full human beings. We dehumanize them. They are sex objects. They exist for the pleasure of others. They exist to produce children for others, for society. So our bodies, because they're sex objects, are not our own. And so I think fundamentally, if we want to address rape culture, which is defined as a culture that accepts rape without really holding the perpetrators accountable, if we want to shift away from a rape culture, we're going to have to address the fundamental way in which we normalize the sexual objectification of women.
And of course, oh, sorry.
No, go on, Lili.
I say that, of course, the entertainment industry, of which the two of you were a part, of which I am a part, Hollywood, the film industry, the music video industry plays a significant role in this lens, right? It provides a lens in which we look at women as sex objects. For example, in Hollywood, it's like women are always the damsel in distress, we're relegated to these like despairing roles. And that's why documentary films such as the one that Caroline was a part of, The Hunting Ground, right, which talked about the anti-rape college movement, Surviving R. Kelly, and now most recently, the one that I speak in with my other Cosby survivors, We Need to Talk About Bill Cosby. They play such important roles because they now place the victim, which is usually a woman, in a role where she's actually a human being, where she actually has a voice. And feelings, where she's equivalent to a male. And we see women on camera, for one of the first times as really human beings, not sex objects. So these documentaries, as well as also shifting rape culture towards believing victims, are also important in viewing women as full thinking, intelligent, capable beings who are worth of respect.
And thinking about Hollywood, 15 years ago, Amy Berg did a documentary called An Open Secret, where she talked about pedophile rings in Hollywood. And it was really difficult for her to make that film. I don't know, I'm in 10 seconds at the end. I remember the secrecy around that because she was so worried about how it was going to hurt her career. And indeed it did. And she was signaling at everything that you were experiencing, right? Wade and James, she was signaling at that and was punished for speaking out about that in the industry.
Yeah.
Right. This is my son's concern. After he came home from that commercial shoot last week, so upset, but went straight to the computer and wrote a letter to the director and copied the producer and SAG-AFTRA in it and his agents. And he wrote that letter all by himself, really reporting the horror of what happened to him on set when he's trying to focus. And as soon as he said it, he said, "Oh man, Mom, am I never going to work again now?
Right.
I'll be able to work again.
Right.
I'll be able to work." And I'm like, well, you can't control some things, but that can't stop you from speaking out, that fear. Right. You're going to be helping a lot of people. You're going to be stopping this guy from sexually harassing another actor on set.
Yeah. I mean, just, do you think that ways in which the entertainment business is set up enable someone like Cosby, like Michael, to abuse at the scale and length that they did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And that was my experience when I was on the Cosby set, because, when Bill Cosby was mentoring me, he made it possible for me to come to the studios to learn. And so I became friends with a lot of the production assistants and fellow actors and stand-ins, some people who I'm still friendly with. And I saw on the faces the power that he wielded that really caused us all to stay silent of what we knew to be true, which was that behind the facade of the Dr. Huxtable character, there's this horrible monster who for decades has been committing, violent sexual crimes against women. So why the silence? People need to eat, so they're worried about their jobs. Like to this day, there are some production assistants on the Cosby Show who saw certain things, who in private tell me that I'm their hero and that they knew that I was suffering, and now it all makes sense. Maybe they didn't know exactly what they were suffering. I was suffering, but they saw all these horrible things happening to me on set, and other ones who knew more of what was happening, but they won't speak publicly because they need to eat. They need to maintain their jobs. And clearly, Bill Cosby still wields power because he got out of prison so many years or earlier, but absolutely, and although it's on a larger scale, right? Because the man supposedly owes, has $400 million of property, whatever he owns. The man is very, very rich, and he wields power monetarily. But then also, I want to say that although it's on a really great scale, Hollywood is on a great scale because we idolize these powerful people, right? They hold in their hand the power of whether we're going to work or not. They have that power to blacklist us, as Cosby threatened that he would do to me. So they have that power of whether or not we're going to be employed. But it just really reflects to people like the girl I'm helping right now, who was raped by a family member. It's still the same dynamic, though not in a very broad, public scale, because there's still a power dynamic. This person, for example, who raped her was 34 years old. She is 16. He owns the house in which they were living. He owned the car that they were driving. So there are all these power dynamics, whether it's your teacher or your Boy Scout, whatever leader, or whether it's your Little League baseball coach. There's always a power dynamic that silences people. And so it becomes like a cult. So we're like, it's really like a cult of personality. The perpetrator is usually charismatic, as Dr. Barbara Ziv, she's the psychiatrist who testified in the Cosby trials, I believe the Weinstein trials and the Judy Huth trial, that most rapes, most sexual assaults occur with people whom we know and trust, like in your case, Michael Jackson, who are beloved by a broader community. So it makes it even more difficult to speak out because you're invested in this relationship that you have, that you want to make it normal. And so, it's a power dynamic it's very complex.
Well, there's that grooming piece as well, that obviously the explicit once meeting grooming piece, but with Michael, and I imagine the case with Cosby as well, the grooming began long before you ever met because of the persona, right? Because of the fame. Right, it's already broadcast. This is a man, this is a person that is lovable and that you can trust and that has your best interest in heart. That's already the storyline long before ever even meeting.
That's a really good point, Wade. So there's this grooming of the society. So they're preparing society to then turn against the victims, you two, me, Caroline. And it's really quite intense because it just like it happened to you guys too. In my case, Bill Cosby, he reached out to my father, invited my father on set. He met my father, and my father was like, wow, adoring him like he's been adored in the public. He called my mother and spoke to my mother on the phone. He invited my siblings and my cousins to the set, so that everybody gets so excited about this great person, this humanitarian who does all this wonderful philanthropy is now actually giving attention to my family member. Oh, how fortunate we are. So it makes it even harder for you to tell your whole family, who also adores and admires him, the horrors of what he's really doing to you in privacy. It's really intense, that grooming, and
it is intense. And they, Cosby and Michael, they know what they're doing. Oh, these are people who craft their public persona in a super calculated way. They're playing chess and everybody else is playing checkers. And like they know exactly what they're doing. They're priming everybody. They're priming all their victims to come to, when they meet them, to trust them and to love them. And it's a calculated thing. And it's, for us, we've seen the other side, right? And for other, and just knowing like, oh, this person, they know what they're doing. This is all the good things that they do are calculated. All the public persona is all calculated.
It's masterful manipulation.
It's masterful.
And of course, there's that smokescreen of the public persona, but then the mind games that they play with you, you as the victim is just, that, oh, I love you like you're one of my children.
Right.
Imagine how pathetic their lives are. I mean, at some core level, that you've got all this money, you've got this fame, you could do anything with it. And what are you doing? You're like Bill Cosby, you're a full-time rapist and a part-time comedian. I mean, imagine your life being that bereft of meaning, that's how you use your money and your celebrity.
Yeah, I also get angry with the position that they're put in is, particularly Michael and Cosby, their position within society was so amazing, and they used it to rape people. That's what they used it for. Like, they had once in a life, like, it's incalculable, like the odds of being positions that they were in to do good. Right. And to be a good, the influence, to be a good human being and to do good. And they used it to rape little children and young women. And like that, I don't understand.
And it really irks me when their fans play the race card and say, oh, you're just trying to bring down another Black man. But let's just be logical and look at all the other plethora of Black men who are famous and rich and have outstanding careers in entertainment or wherever. They're not raping people. Bill Cosby was one of my mentors. I went to him for mentoring, just as I was going at that time to Spike Lee, to Ving Rhames, to Eric LaSalle, to these really prominent Black actors who were all mentoring me, sometimes in their home, helping me with the lines that I had to prepare for an audition or for a theatrical stage performance. These men did not rape me. They never treated me with any kind of a sexual disrespect whatsoever, with no disrespect whatsoever. So for people to say, oh, you're just trying to bring down Black men, that's ridiculous. They are anomalies. Bill Cosby, Michael Jackson, R. Kelly are anomalies.
Right. And there's, I think to your point, there's plenty of other amazing people to stand behind. There's plenty to raise up and to say thank you, rather than pick these, just, stand on a hill for these people who are raping, who are awful people. There's plenty of good people doing good things.
That's right.
I was going to say, it brings up this idea about art and, well, can you separate the artist from the art?
Yeah.
For me, no, because I see how they use their art as the grooming calling card persona in order to engage in, decades of violence. And so, every time I go into a store or restaurant and they're playing Michael Jackson, I say something, right? I'm not consuming Bill Cosby's art. I'm not consuming anything from Harvey Weinstein. And that's rough because, there's a lot of great films and a lot of great filmmakers.
Yeah, it's a lot of films. Yeah.
But how do you separate, how can you possibly be putting money into the pockets of rapists or their estates at this point in time, if you truly care about survivors?
Right. And here's the complexity of that, right? Me too, Caroline, because James and I, we were talking on the phone before we finally met in person. And when we met in person, I bubbled like a baby. I was like, you saw me.
That was sweet. Yeah. I love
art show opening of mine. And everybody, my kids were like, who's this guy? Who's this handsome guy? Familiar. And I was just like, oh, friend, he's one of my Instagram friends, right? They're like, who is he? Who is he?
Oh.
Familiar. But the complexity is this. Yes, every time I'm driving in the car and hear a Michael Jackson song, I turn it off right away. My kids turn it, my kids start grooving to it. I'm like, look, I'm friends with one of his sexual assault survivors. And we turn and they say, I'm so sorry. We turn off the music, right? And I don't call you, James, because I don't want to trigger you. You're probably having a great day, but I'm thinking, oh, my heart is with James. Poor James, poor James. He has to contend with this coming on all over the place in the elevators and the radio.
Yeah.
And the same with the Cosby Show, right? So I continue to receive residual paychecks from the work that I did on the Cosby Show. The thing is, yes, at the helm of these productions, whether it's a music video or the Cosby Show, are these monsters, right? The rapists. But then the complexity is that the vehicle of it also includes hardworking people, makeup artists, production assistants, grips, gaffers, lighting, everything, actors, guest stars like myself. And so the question is it fair then to stop playing the Cosby Show because at the helm is this monster whom we do not want to reap rewards from what he used to, as a smokescreen to perpetuate his violent crimes against women. Right. But then all these other people are suffering now because now we're not getting our residuals or whatever. That's a really complex question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Caroline, how would you?
I can't separate the emotional part, but you just made a beautiful point, Lili, right? It's very complex. I think a bit about the enablers, not that everybody on set was an enabler. But I do think especially in the R. Kelly case, but I think in every case, you have a lot of people turning their head the other way when they're watching this happen. And of course, as in most things, the economic effects are not necessarily going to hit the people who deserve it the most, the hardest.
Right.
So is that just like, that's just how that everybody has to suffer? Every hardworking individual who put their sweat and tears and their creative work into making this great work of art, because the Cosby Show was a great show in the sense that it talked about values that were never addressed. It elevated the role of the Black family. And for me, it was absolutely exciting, electric, and exhilarating to be on set where there's so many Black professionals. I had never in my life, like I told you, I had worked in major productions as a principal actor, as a main character. I never in my life seen, so many so much melanin on set, Black producers. Right. Black stage managers, Black production assistants, Black ADs, Black makeup, Black hair. That just didn't happen. So it's a real travesty. It's very, very tragic for those hardworking individuals who work to make a really great work that the creator is a monster. And many of those, yes, a lot of people did know they're enablers, but there are a lot of people who didn't know either, and they were just going doing their hard work. And now
do you think, first, I don't know the answer to that question, so I won't pretend to, but I wonder if one of the points is, or one thing that I think about is if people could accept these abusers for who they were, like hold both truths that this art, the Cosby Show it's a part of American history. It has an important role. And Cosby was also a rapist. Like, it's hard for people to hold both the truths in their head at the same time. And so the easy thing for them to do is pick a side, pick one or the other, and say, I'm either gonna hate them, or I'm gonna love them, or they're gonna lash out at you for saying the truth. Like, they're just picking, they're picking black or white. They're just picking a side rather than holding the complexities that life is all about and the complexities of who these people are in the situation that happened. I think that, I just see that happen all the time. People they can't wrap their heads around the whole truth and accept both things, and they just pick a side.
You make such an important point, James. That's exactly how society tends to react. And that's why I think that documentaries like We Need to Talk About Bill Cosby are so critically important, because it inspires the public to think that way, to think critically, and to be able to hold, as you say, in the same hand the fact that bad people do good things and good people do bad things. That's just the complexity of
one of the points to that was in the documentary. I forget who it was, but one of the guys was talking about they view Cosby as, some people view him as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I say it's all Mr. Hyde. Mm-hmm. Right. That hit me, because it is like, I think I'm just raising that to the point where we're trying to say, oh, look, they do good things and they do bad things. But then the counterpoint to that is the good things that they do is calculated good things. Right. So it's Mr. Hyde doing good things. So you have to wrap your head around that as well, that like the things that they do have a positive effect. Right. He's, Cosby did outward acts that helped other people, but he's doing it through the lens of Mr. Hyde. It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's like an instrument for him, that his philanthropy is an instrument for him to be able to provide him the access to harm women, because people looking the other way. That's the smoke screen. Look the other way at all these wonderful things I do, but I'm really, a monster.
Yeah.
I feel like, in trying to, the subject we're talking about, is there separation between the art and the human in trying to deal with situations like Cosby, like Michael, like R. Kelly, like many, many others that have occurred already, and trying to figure out how to deal with it now. That's one thing, and that's its own set of questions and answers. And then I wonder about, as far as moving forward, in trying to shift these experiences and avoid abusers being able to at least get to the level of power to be able to do it at the scale and length at which these abusers did. I feel like one of those pieces, and I think, Lili, you brought it up earlier, just that word idolatry. I mean, just that's consciousness shift of how we just, as soon as somebody is good, of course, the entertainment business has its own brand of it, but it's not prejudiced just to there. I mean, when somebody is good at something, an athlete or whatever it may be, an artist of any kind, a successful person, we just tend to automatically equate with, if they're good at that, they must be amazing, perfect, great people, and they should be put on this pedestal. And right from that point, everyone's in trouble. Just this 100%. Feels like this big consciousness shift that I think is occurring, and it's a lot slower than I'm sure we would like, But
do you find yourself doing that with people? I guess this is to all of you. Do you find yourself doing that to people you like, and you're like, oh, that person, and you find yourself attributing like all these other amazing attributes to them, and just being like, you know what? And then you remember, and you're like, oh, all right, let's put the brakes on that.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I do, James? Like every time I'm talking to somebody about a musician, like I want to post, for example, a great new work that some musical artist has done and how I admire that person so much. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, let me Google that person's name. And then if I find out they're also a sexual assaulter or a sexual harasser, and I'm like, like I can't love that artist anymore. But I do that. I do a check now,
Yeah.
We have a lot of sacred cows we still haven't spoken much about. For example, David Bowie.
Oh God.
Oh really? Oh, come on. Oh man. Oh,
okay. But here's the thing about Bowie. When I was working on a pitch for a celebrity rapist documentary, I uncovered so much shocking information about the ages of the girls that he was grooming for his rock star friends. I mean, we're talking tweens. They can say what they want, but it's actually very clear. So he had a number of probably first-time sexual experiences for them with tweens and teen girls. It was an open secret in Hollywood. And if you try to add it to his Wikipedia page, it will immediately disappear. He's got all these folks who, not he, but his fans go to the page and scrub it. He also had a sexual assault allegation. I believe it was in 1987. A woman went to the police after a show. So multiple allegations. And I don't know if you're this way, but for me, like we have these idols essentially, and it's really hard to hear about it, especially someone who's pushed the envelope with, gender boundaries and gender fluidity. And of course, like Michael Jackson's work is fantastic, and Bill Cosby was pushing the boundaries of what, Black men comedians could be. I mean, we just go Weinstein, the fantastic films. I mean, look at what they're doing. And I think, the fandom, and this is what you're getting at, Wade, this idea that they're, because the work is good, that they are good. There are still people we're not talking about. And I think there was a reluctance for a really long time to talk about Woody Allen and what he did to his daughter. But we already had evidence that he, married someone who he likely had a relationship with when she was a minor. And that was also his daughter. And so like these conversations that people don't want to have about these iconic figures. And I guess the bigger question that you're bringing up is what happens the bigger question is what happens when humans elevate other humans in ways that make them untouchable and give them that sort of power, and then they abuse that power. So yeah, someone should do a Bowie doc. They should include the fact that every time you try to update just with facts and link to pages on Wikipedia, his folks immediately come and scrub it.
Yeah. Yeah. As you brought up, James, being able to, life actually is never this or that, right? It's this, that, and the other at the same time. To be able to hold these paradoxes, these conflicting truths simultaneously, to expand our consciousness, to be able to hold that and take that in and act accordingly from that place, right?
I think it's safe to say anytime I hear about one allegation against somebody, I'm like, okay, 92% likelihood that it happened. When two people come forward saying the same thing, it goes to almost 100%, the odds of it happening, just based on FBI stats. And so obviously we have a system where you are innocent until proven guilty, but I will say that our system doesn't work for sexual violence. And so we have to seek justice in other ways. We have to seek justice through media justice, right? Through reputational damage. And it's unfortunate because if our justice, if our legal system, let's not call it our justice system, if our legal system actually worked and took this seriously, then we wouldn't be in this gray area over here where survivors, are fighting for something. Also just looking at the data, it's really, not wise to be dismissing survivors when we should never dismiss survivors. But again, when two come forward, it's almost 100%.
That leads me to this question. The term "believe survivors." Right. I'm wondering what both of yours interpretations of that mean. How should people, when they hear that, people who haven't experienced sexual trauma, how should they understand that saying? How should we be processing that? Or what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think that they have to understand the nuances of what survivorship means. For example, like in Wade's case, I understand in this girl who I'm helping right now, there's a natural tendency to deny what happened to you, because you don't want to have to endure the trial that's going to come at you when all the blaming and shaming hits you with the fans or the family or the law or whatever. So I think that that people need, in believing survivors, I think they need to understand the nuances of what it means to be a survivor. So there's the denial, there's the fact that since most, as we mentioned earlier, since most predators are beloved individuals whom we know, that there's this tendency for the victim to go back. Like people say, well, why did you go back? Why'd you go back? I'm like, because I had a relationship with him, because I knew him, because I wanted to make it all right, because I hoped this time he wouldn't do it, because I think I love him. He said he loved me. It's like, why'd you go back? You were groomed to go back.
Yeah.
Then there's also, why didn't you leave? Did he have a gun pointed at your head? Oh, well, there's this thing called dissociation, right? When our body is being attacked. Like my son, when he came back, he said, Mom, I'm so angry at myself for not having said anything when it happened. He did tell the other actors that it was happening. He told his friends about it, but he didn't tell the producer or the director, this is happening to me on set, because he was like the cognitive dissonance. Whenever this guy sexually harassed him on set last week, he did it like right before calling action, right? They're very calculated, these little predators. They're very calculated in how they silence their victims. So if he's, rubbing up against my son in a sexual matter right before he calls action, and then my son has to go into act, he's like, there's no time to tell anybody. This guy just rubbed up his front side behind my butt. That you can't tell that to people because you got to act now. You have to perform. And then in between takes, like right before the guy called, reset, he told the other, actors, this guy is really touching up on me. He's too touchy. But so to understand why we don't speak out. So my son was upset at himself for not speaking out, but he froze. You freeze, like when you're in shock, when someone is committing a sexual act upon you, whether it's a harassment or assault or whatever, your body goes into a state of shock. Your mind freezes. You're confused, and it takes a while to process what's happening to you before you can actually speak out. So there's that. There are just all these other rape myths about going back. Some of the Cosby survivors even went back and gave gifts to Bill Cosby. So I would say believing survivors would have to do, like, believing survivors might take educating yourself as to what these rape myths are, and really understanding, really just being sophisticated in your thinking, as Caroline intimated. There's like that rape is like one of the only crimes where the victim is actually being re-victimized. It's like where the victim on trial is, the victim is put on trial. I mean, when someone steals your car, they don't like say to you, "Oh, did you leave your car door open? Or why'd you park in that area?" You know? Or, what were you wearing that caused your car to be stolen? So I don't know. I would say that. What would you say, Caroline? I don't know.
That was a beautiful answer.
That really was. And just a quick aside, if someone was rubbing their genitals on somebody else outside their clothing, that's sexual battery.
Yeah.
That's illegal. So that's that is actually a criminal offense. Not to say the legal system would process it that way, but that's what that is. The first thing that comes to mind in thinking about believing survivors is that how important that is, that's the first thing you say to someone who comes forward, right? So if someone is to the point where they are sharing this information with you, the very first thing that I say is, I believe you. And then the second thing I say is, I'm here for whatever you want to share, no judgment, right? I think there are a lot of things that survivors do that make it difficult to believe them, right? So one of the things is that survivors tend to not come forward for years and years and years. And we've all shared why that is today, right? But it's a myth that you weren't raped because it took you years to come forward. Most survivors don't come forward for a very long time. Another big rape myth is that you were somehow responsible for it. And we get this message all the time. So Lili, you're talking about your son being upset about it. I certainly thought it was my fault. In fact, that was reinforced by my family that it was my fault that this happened. And so what we tend to do is try to make ourselves whole again in whatever way we can. So we take responsibility for it. We blame ourselves. We internalize that. We also engage in kind of wild things, like we might have sex with that person in a consensual way, like corrective sex, in order to make the rape not rape, because it's really hard for, I think, a lot of people to take on such a stigmatized label as being, a rape survivor, a rape victim. And so we want to not think of ourselves in that way. And we go through a lot of hoops to make it otherwise, even though at the end of the day, that's exactly what it is. And if we lived in a culture that wasn't a rape culture, we would believe and support survivors when they came forward, and we would help them on their healing journey.
Great answer.
Yeah. For both of you, Lili and Caroline, Lili, maybe I can begin with you. In getting to the point where you, ready is a hard word to say, but where you decided to really go public and come forward with what happened to you with Cosby, of all of the bad and all of the challenges and all of the fear and the backlash and all of that has occurred during that experience of coming forward, honoring all of that, has there been good post coming forward, and if so, what has that been for you?
There's been a lot of good in my life. My primary good is meeting Lili Bernard.
Yeah, that's like the golden question, right? Is it worth it?
Right.
Is it worth to suffer through all the abandonment? Because you really know who your friends are when you put your neck on the line. You have a lot of abandonment, a lot of people trying to silence you.
Yeah.
It was my spouse trying to silence me violently. So you really know who loves you and who doesn't. But yeah, it's weird. So like on the one hand, yeah, the suffering was horrible and I wouldn't want to go through it again. I wish Bill Cosby never drugged me and raped me. My career would definitely be at another level had I not gone through that trauma. That's the one hand. But on the other hand, I asked myself, was that trauma necessary for me to have impacted so much change in culture, along with my survivor siblinghood, such as yourself. I mean, we Cosby survivors, in that campaign led by Caroline Heldman and Ivy Buttini, we solicited the help of legislators and we abolished that statute of limitations on rape prosecution in California.
Yeah.
I tried a dozen times to do it as recently as like 2 years prior. We made it through 6 Senate and Assembly hearings with unanimous votes like this, because like the evidence, for example, that I was prevented to present in a court of law because of the statute of limitations that I saved with me about my Cosby trauma, I brought it and showed it to these legislators. I showed them all the evidence I had. And Judy Huth's case, for example, even though it was 47 years old, evidence is that there are still credible witnesses with keen memory who can testify. There's still evidence. She had so much evidence and so many witnesses and such a strong testimony that jury clearly found him liable of committing this sexual crime against her when she was 16. So, but yet we had to suffer all of this. However, had I not suffered it, we probably would still have a freaking 10-year limit of statute of limitations in California. Caroline Heldman and myself, we banded together with Mira Sorvina and Jessica Barth, Weinstein survivors, and we campaigned and lobbied and did a lot of work to change these Me Too laws relative to employment discrimination and sexual harassment. And now instead of having a 1-year time limit in terms of reporting sexual harassment, there's now a 3 years time limit. There's no mandatory NDA. There's no more, you can't have a what was that? A no rehire clause. We got rid of that. No rehire clause. No mandatory, only in-house arbitration. So we changed so many laws for the better of our state of California because of our trauma. And you right now are impacting so many survivors positively to speak out and to pursue justice, and you're shifting culture because of your trauma. So it's, again, really complex.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd like to hear Caroline's thought on that.
Yeah.
I think being a survivor, if you can make it to a certain stage of healing, gives you a level of grit. And I'm speaking in generalities here, but when Lili, when we first connected and she said, "Are you a survivor?" It was, seeing yourself in that other person and having been through it. And maybe this is hardships in general. But I feel in some ways, it's a gift in the sense that it was a terrible situation, a terrible experience, and it can now be, leveraged for the good for other people. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I don't love it when Hollywood films, essentially make rape jokes all the time, especially, for example, like men in prison. It's a really common theme. There are 400,000 rapes each year, mostly of men who are incarcerated, and we don't talk about that. We don't even put those stats in the overall rape stats by and large. So I would love to really focus on survivors everywhere. I don't want anyone to ever have that experience. I know a lot of times folks will get on, the Cosby or get on various posts about rapists, and they'll say, "Oh, I hope he goes to prison and he gets raped." I'm like, well, I actually don't want this experience to happen to anyone. And the fact that Lili and I and James and Wade, you are using your voice and your power to make sure that it doesn't, do what you can to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. I mean, that is essentially our superpower.
Yes. I think, Caroline, I've seen footage of you. I've watched interviews where you're on Fox News and you have these like 3 men like wagging their fingers at you and attacking you. And it's like you're alone there. You handle yourself beautifully. And I feel like it's a superpower that you have. And knowing too that you're a survivor as well. I mean, confrontation and defending yourself and being a survivor of sexual abuse, like that, I feel like robs you of those powers, right? So me seeing you watching you do that seemed amazing to me. I don't even know if there's a question here. But how, I don't know. How can you do that? Or is there anything for us to learn to be able to do that ourselves?
Your relationship with conflict.
Yeah, your relationship is so, it's great. Anyway, I admired that.
Well, thank you. That's high praise coming from you, James. I will say that I feel like because my experiences of physical and sexual violence happened so early on and then throughout most of my early life, and Lili, maybe you had a similar experience, I feel like I came out of the womb fighting. And that was part of, surviving, that if I didn't do that, I would be dead already. In fact, I took out student loans for my PhD because I didn't have, family support for that. We were really poor. I took those out thinking, well, it doesn't really matter what I take out because I'm not going to be alive when I'm 30. That's a really common, I think, thing we don't talk about. And I don't know if it comes from trauma or it comes from poverty or a combination of the two, but you just don't think you're going to be alive. And it wasn't like a passing thing. It was a very strong feeling.
So interesting. Yes.
Did you have that too?
Imagining myself as an adult, I imagined I would be homeless. That's what I thought my future was: homeless, abandoned. That was like my imagined future.
Because you
were all subconscious. It was subconscious. It was not something when I imagined me older, I imagined me as homeless with nobody loving me.
Right.
Yeah, subconscious.
Oh,
yeah.
How about you, Wade?
I think the way I saw myself was alone in the future. That it was all I really had was me. And that I could, it was not safe to let anybody in. And that's obviously the experience of the abuse, but also the words and the beliefs that Michael put into me just to that effect, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as he was betraying me and abusing me, he was teaching me never trust anybody.
Right.
Except for him, of course. Right. Because he was the only one who loved me and the only one who has ever and will ever take care of me. Right. But so, yeah, there was no one else to trust. So, yeah, I think that was just kind of the general abstract feeling that it was always just going to be me, that I would be alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting, because this little girl who I'm helping, her adult family member, predator, said the same thing to her because her natural father is alcoholic and violent, and she was homeless because of that. And he would say the same thing to her: "You're going to be alone and abandoned. No one else is going to care for you except for me. And
right.
I love you." So it's like they're all the same people, whether they're Michael Jackson or some.
Gosh, so many similarities. Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about the courage of Caroline and the two.
Yeah.
What Caroline taught me, what Gloria Allred taught me, because Gloria Allred was by my side when I first spoke out, and they taught me really that yes, clearly you have fear, that's real, but you have to pay attention to it. You have to pay attention to it. You got to be ready. But you can't let it paralyze you. You have to walk through the fear, and in almost like Caroline talks about coming out of the womb fighting, almost use the fear as a catalyst for you to fight, like adrenaline, and to fight and make it fight harder. So fear plays this really interesting role in terms of your courage, to walk through that, to use the fear as a catalyst, to be courageous, to be brave. And I like Caroline too. I thought I'd never make it past 30 because part of the symptoms that I had as a result of the abuse was that I deserved it. I must have deserved it, and I'm scum of the earth. And I can't go on living. And so I had suicidal ideation, and I never thought I'd live past 30 either. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fear, not to be paralyzed by fear. And Caroline, I'm going to tell you something. I got to share a quick anecdote with you. So we caravanned up to the state capitol multiple times when we campaigned and abolished the statute of limitations on rape prosecution in California. We had caravans of cars, so 4 or 5, 6 of us in 3 or 4 different cars, and we're singing and dancing and stuff. And then all of a sudden, Caroline's in the front, driving. She's like, oh no, look. And we're in the middle of the freeway and there's this big gigantic bumper that fell off in the middle of the freeway and cars are going 70 miles an hour. She pulls over to the left. She gets out in the middle of the freeway and stops all the traffic, like freaking 7 lanes of trucks and cars going 70 miles an hour, and stops it like this, just like as an X. And we're screaming, Caroline, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm stopping the traffic. There's going to be an accident if we don't remove that bumper. And like, you're going to get killed. Get back in the car. We were freaking out. She dragged the bumper back. I mean, she commanded all the traffic to stop, like in a movie, like an avant-garde, just stop. And she's there. She drags the big old bumper out off the freeway, gets back in the car, and we go. That's Caroline Heldman.
Right. I mean, it sounds like an amazing analogy for the work, Caroline, that you're doing, right? Like, everybody, don't you see this bumper here?
I know.
Like, you're all driving by and acting like it's not here. But no, we're going to stop and we're going to look at this bumper and we're going to pick it up, and it's heavy as hell.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. And we're going to drag it off this road together.
By herself. And if you look at all the photos of me where the Cosby likely shills are attacking me inside and outside of the courtroom, you'll see Caroline, she's literally at my back, holding my back and just like scowling at them, like just ready to do her taekwondo chops and get them. She's fiercely, because they're attacking me, and she's fiercely like just in a fight stance, to protect me. And it's amazing. It's outstanding.
Well, you need it. They're coming after you physically. I mean, I'm not even kidding. They're menacing Lili physically.
Yeah.
Because she's what you think about Cosby.
Lili, what has it, I mean, just to continue on the track you just started going down, what has it meant to have Caroline in your life?
Okay, don't make me cry. She's my sister. She's also my patron. She sustains my family. I've got 6 children. I'm living in a house with them by myself, and my one of my sons lives in Hollywood. He's doing really great as an actor on his own, but she helps to sustain my family. She provides for my family in ways that I couldn't even begin to mention. She's just such a sister. Like, she knows me so well. She loves me, and I feel like I need to reciprocate so much more than I am, because I'm in such a, I'm so vulnerable with my PTSD. I actually have disability from my PTSD. It's debilitating. I have real difficulty with my PTSD. And for me to be able to be now in this position where I'm helping this little girl, this young teenage girl I'm talking about, it's like my paying it forward. Okay, I'm not able to help Caroline beyond giving her art. I don't have the economic means to help her beyond. I give her my artwork, to try to reciprocate a little bit of what she does to sustain my family. But she's like, show me that, okay, what Caroline does for me and continues to do for me to sustain me as a survivor, to help me keep going forward, I can do for someone else, so I'm now doing this for this other little girl. Yeah. But she's like, even though she's younger than me, how many years younger? She's like 8 years younger than me. She's like my big sister, if that makes any sense. She's my role model. She is a symbol of love and goodness and purity and self-sacrifice. No, she is just like an amazing, resilient human being. And she's just such an example of like that color, because obviously we come from different ethnic backgrounds. I'm an Afro-Cuban immigrant, but she's also economically disadvantaged family. She grew up very poor. That color, socioeconomics, race, gender, all these things have nothing to do with how closely your hearts can really connect. And I just feel like Caroline is family. I love her so much, and I'm indebted to her. I think she's an angel, and I can't believe that I'm just so blessed to be able to have her, to experience life with her.
So beautiful.
Beautiful.
Lili, you want me to?
And then
I'll set the record straight.
Intelligence. She's like freaking intelligent. She's a highly published author. All her books are published in major press, like Duke Press, Harvard Press. She's a PhD. She's a role model of excellence for me too. She teaches me how to formulate my words, whenever, in the beginning, when I was first speaking, she'd actually sit me down and we talk about our talking points and how to be succinct and how to really take advantage of this opportunity to be in the news and really impact change through the power of my voice. And that she taught me, how powerful the voice can be. It can be a powerful political tool. It can be a powerful tool for healing and for encouraging others. And that Caroline teaches me. She teaches me excellence. and compassion and humility and love, 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 love.
Yes,
Beautiful.
love. Okay, so my response to that would be that I am thankful every day to be best friends with Lili Bernard, but also to be able to support a person I think is a living icon, right? Lili is the voice of the Me Too movement. I think Lili has done more to positively impact survivors than anyone in the movement. Not that it's a race or a competition, but Lili, you are the reason why so many survivors feel comfortable coming forward, get the help that they need, start their healing journeys. That's all because of you, because you have fearlessly gone out in a public space and essentially opened your veins and been vulnerable at great personal expense. And so Lili is not just, a living icon. She's also my favorite artist, and she has 6 beautiful children, each one accomplished in ways you cannot imagine. Lili's family is the pinnacle of Black excellence. If I can use that term, you know what I mean, Lili. We talk about this, right? I mean, there isn't one child after another. One is an animation artist whose work has gone to the White House. Another is a successful actor. Another is a successful, a musician with an advanced engineering degree with honors. We can go on and on about what Lili's love and activism and courage has done in the world. And I just feel, honored to be able to be a part of her journey.
Wow. She just knows, like, by my breath, where my emotional and mental state is. And she just says the right things,
I will say that Lili mentioned earlier that Lili had mentioned that she gets really triggered on the freeway, and 4 or 5 times she's called me on the phone, unable to, she could barely breathe, almost unable to drive, either pulled over or still going very slow with cars honking around her. So this very brave face that most of us see most of the time, Lili really pays a personal price.
Yeah,
having
right.
brought all of this up again in her life.
Right. Yeah. You pay that price behind the scenes, right? One thing Lili just mentioned, which was the power of the voice, and how this kind of abuse that we experienced, so much of it is silencing our voice. So much of our abusers' attention is getting us to shut up, getting us to be quiet. And that is total counter to what needs to happen, which is finding your voice and using that power, because it is power. The words are power. What you say is power. How you say it is power. And those are robbed of you with this kind of abuse. And people don't need to necessarily go on television. They don't need to speak out in that manner, right? We were saying you don't have to do that. That is your choice. But there is a power in speaking it, saying it to somebody, getting those words out. And it's such a powerful thing. And it's great that you both have found that voice. Yeah, it's just, I don't even know if I have a question there.
I want to ask you, James, because I think, it is very powerful, not just from a political point of view in terms of changing laws and in shifting culture, but also from a healing perspective, right?
Right.
You actually give yourself the permission to say, yes, it's not my fault.
Right.
It was horrible. But I want to know, like, in terms of speaking out, you two have a podcast. This is amazing. So I'm astounded at the courage that the two of you have.
Yes.
All the Michael Jackson fans out there, so vicious. Tell me about that process. I want to hear how this is for you. Astounding to me. It's exceptional.
Thank you.
Oh man. You want to take that, Wade?
How that's been. It's been a journey. It's been as far as dealing with and receiving that backlash and the threats and all of that. I think for me, and this kind of relates to something you were saying a moment ago, Lili, before I went public with any of this, And, early on, after I disclosed for the first time to my therapist and kind of began the healing journey, I think we talk about this in the film, so I'll say it briefly, but I had this session at a beach where I had like a sort of ritual burning of items, artifacts that related to Michael and my relationship with him. And as I was burning some of this stuff away, I was just looking at the flame and these items burning that had meant so much to me and held so much weight, and they were just, disintegrating in front of me. And I just started speaking to Michael. And I said, something to the effect of, I burn away your lies. I burn away your manipulation. And somehow, I don't know how, but somehow I'm going to turn your wrong into a right. And so for me, it's just been a continuing journey from there of like just coming back to that center. What's the next right that I can engage in relation to this, in response to all of the wrong that occurred? So that, so it gets really hard with that backlash, but I'm able to kind of keep coming back to that. And I think with this podcast thing, this came up with, the film Leaving Neverland mostly, spent the most of its time talking about what happened up until sort of kind of the beginning of coming out, going public. And then there's been such a profound healing journey since then, since coming forward, right? Both for myself and for James. So the inspiration for this was kind of how can we pick up the story from there, right? Of kind of what's next and what's been our individual healing journey, and how can we provide a platform like this where there's no right or wrong, there's no one way, to go about healing, but what are the myriad of ways that all of us survivors and advocates and specialists have learned and have engaged in with healing, so we can open up that conversation even more. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it's like, yes, it gets hard, but I just kind of keep coming back to that motivation, that impetus, and then it makes me feel stronger than they can't get me. It's bigger than that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So Wade and James, you're doing something that maybe no one is doing, which is taking folks along on your healing journey, right? So we're seeing it unfold in real time. And so you're letting survivors know that healing is possible. I think a lot of us internalize that trauma and we stay in it for so many years that it feels like we can't get out of it, but we can. We're not broken. We are healing, but we're not broken. And you're showing people that, and it's such a powerful journey to be taking us on. You're doing incredible work.
Yeah, Wade, and what you said at the end there, it's so much bigger than that. That's like something I think about often with my journey of speaking out. Okay, this is much bigger than your body, the organism, right? Than your body that's trying to, function in life, and you're doing really great, but then, there's a trigger, and all of a sudden you're melting into this PTSD dissociative state. But it's bigger than your little personal suffering or your isolation. And James, do you feel like that? Like the magnitude of your speaking out, like how it's so much more than just you?
So much more than me. Yeah, I don't know if I've wrapped my head around that. I think everything that Wade said, I feel as well. I also think it's like, all the attacks we got and like post Leaving Neverland, it was difficult to deal with that post. I didn't want to be silenced. Yeah. I didn't want to go back to that place where I was scared to speak out, and where I couldn't speak out. And I didn't want to go back there, and I don't want to go back there. So part of this is me finding my voice as well, like finding the strength again. And I'm able to speak with amazing people like yourselves. So it's a nice way to have healing conversations and be able to find my own voice and to feel comfortable and strong with it. I think this is why I resonated with your voice is so powerful, and speaking out is so powerful. Purely in a selfish reason, like not even for other people, like it's for you, like it's in healing for yourself, right? There's that. And then there's the other level where it helps other people. They can watch you speak out, right? And they can go, if they can do it, I can do it, which is like which I felt when I first saw Wade, was like, well, if Wade can get better, then I can get better. And then I went into therapy, and it's like, if he can do it, I can do it. So there's that level to it. You watch other people go through it, and then you say, well, you know what, I can do this. So it's a lot of things, but finding your voice, like I said, the voice is so powerful. So find my own voice, be confident with who I am. And all this is part of that growing process.
I have a question for the two of you, because this is, one of the silver lining, of course, the great silver lining of going through this process is the survivor siblinghood, the support we have with one another. But another interesting thing to me was like that it also revealed to me that, reflecting on the fact that it's so much bigger than just me, that so many people are suffering the same things that we have been suffering without having spoken out. Like, I don't know if this happened to you too, but so I get a lot of people reaching out to me from all over the world as if I were some kind of expert on healing from rape or speaking out against rape. So many, people, men and women, telling me that because of you, now I have the courage to press charges against my uncle or this or that. And then what was interesting is that some of the people within my own life, whom I had known and loved intimately for years, didn't tell me until I spoke out of the horrible sexual crime that they survived. I'm like, wow, I'm so sorry. So did that happen to you too?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with first and foremost, the people I don't know or didn't know, reaching out from all over the world and sharing their stories, and survivors, but also either parents or romantic partners of survivors, or parents saying things like, I never understood my son who is a survivor until I saw the film, and now I get it. And I mean, those just, there's nothing like that feeling of that pebble in the pond, and yes, a few instances of people that I know and thought, I thought I knew them as much as they thought they knew me, right? About all the stories of my life, who came forward with stories of abuse, opportunities for levels of vulnerability and closeness that were just barriers before for both of us, Lili, I'm thinking you have 5 sons, is that right?
5 sons and a daughter. She's my daughter.
I mean, children at all, as we know, is just such an incredible and challenging experience being a parent. I wonder, particularly in relation to, the horrible abuse you suffered at the hands of a man, and then raising 5 beautiful males. Just, I know it's a huge question, but what struggles or what that has been like, or,
Well, I've raised them as feminists. So as Caroline mentioned, my son, my firstborn, he was 17 at the time when he attended our very first End Rape SL meeting as a group. Caroline had been working on it before, but I think that was around June of 2015. And so he came to that, and he came to a number of events of our End Rape SL events. We did, for example, protest at his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It was very well televised, and he participated in that. But to raise my sons as feminists, and particularly as Black male feminists, because as I had mentioned, it is against the status quo for Black people to speak out against our perpetrators, sexual perpetrators, since plantation days. But and to try to really encourage them, because their father was a very negative force in my life, very negative force in my life. And really abused me badly relative to trying to keep me silent about speaking out against Bill Cosby. So to try to really counter all that programming, the negative programming that they learned from their father, which is sexist, which is blaming and shaming the rape victim. And unfortunately, there is a lot of blaming and shaming of the rape victim, not only in Black culture, but in all cultures. So to really teach them about the sensitivities that women have to go through, just being ogled at, being objectified by men. And I think, whereas it's very sad that my son had to endure what he had to endure last week on the set, being sexually harassed by one of the production people, that he got a small taste, a glimpse, and he said, wow, I got such a glimpse of what you and your peers go through. So to teach them about the nuances, about the challenges of just really being a woman, and how, like, Caroline knows that when we were at the courthouse, that those people who were attacking me the most were Black men. Unfortunately, it saddens me to say that those people who attack me the most online are Black men. I was attacked in my home, by my Black spouse, trying to actually blaming and shaming me violently and trying to silence me about Bill Cosby. But so when a Black man actually speaks out, there are a few of them who did. I have a handful of Black male friends who did speak out and defend me, but they were few. And so I want my sons to grow up to be feminists and to speak out, to go against the status quo and to elevate Black women, because Black women's lives matter too, to elevate all women and rape survivors. And
Lili has raised 5 fantastic feminist men, or I guess a few are still teens, but they're exceptional in the sense that they have stood up for her. Rafa, your firstborn, was part of the reason why you came public. He has been a fierce advocate, and it's truly inspiring to see Lili's children, especially the older males, have her back publicly, privately, fighting for her. It's just a really beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, it took me a lot of courage to just get through my abusive ex-spouse's attempts to silence me violently from coming out. That was a great sign of courage for myself to break through that and to come public despite his violence and his threats. And yeah, Caroline is right. I forgot to mention, we were fighting about this when he was, verbally, abusively, and violently trying to silence me. And I had, he wouldn't even let me tell my kids about what happened to me. And when during one of these incidences where we were fighting, my son Rafa, who was 17 at the time, came down and he overheard us. He said, "What? You mean, Mom? You mean you're one of the survivors? You mean this Bill Cosby really did do this?" And he said, "Mom, why don't you speak out? You got to speak out, speak out, speak out, Mom." And of course, their dad was conditioning them, programming them to think that if I did speak out, that they would be blamed and shamed and mocked at school and all these horrible things. I mean, I can't even repeat the lies, the horrible lies that he was telling my kids. And of course, none of them were true. And so he was shocked to see how my kid reacted in a totally opposite manner, and that what he was trying to instill in them, which was to subjugate me, to silence me. And my son was like, "You got to speak out, Mom. You got to speak out, Mommy. Please speak out. You've got to help get this man in prison. You got to do it. You got to speak out." And Raphael, he spoke on the BBC News with me. And then my kids, all 5 of my sons and my daughter, we all attended the Huth v. Cosby trial. We all attended that on multiple days, to really not only just to support Judy Huth, whom I had never met before, but to also present an image of Black people supporting this white woman survivor of sexual assault against an iconic Black man. Because in that courtroom, they were throwing around the lies that this was, a white woman trying to bring down a Black man. And we wanted to show in our presence, in our Blackness, supporting this white woman victim, that no, it's not about race, that is a lie. It's about rape. And so we did this. My sons did that. They supported Judy Huth as a white woman, speaking out against this iconic Black male, once beloved celebrity, now known rapist. And they also did it to support me, because it was difficult for me to be in that courtroom to listen to everything that was happening. It was triggering. So they came there and sat with me. And not only did they come, but their friends of color came, their Korean male friends came, their Black male friends came. We packed that courtroom with men of color in support of this white woman, a sexual assault survivor, a Bill Cosby Show, that it's not about race, it's about rape.
Wow.
Those are the kind
Beautiful.
of men that I have as 5 young sons.
What of all the services you have performed for the world, what an incredible one you're doing there as a mother of these children. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to hear about your relationship with your children as a survivor, because I see James's videos with his kids. They're so cute playing guitar with your kids. How is that? I mean, you're looking at your kids' eyes. What do you feel when you're looking at them when they're nearing the age that you were when you were attacked?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been a long time.
Quite a lot of anticipation for that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my son saved my life. There's no question. Along with my wife, Amanda. My wife, Amanda, kind of opened the door to a new way of life. And my son just kicked it wide open. And of the many incredible things and healing things he's done for me and continues to do, one of them being, I was so, the side effect of surviving the abuse, I was so disconnected from little Wade. Right. It was just so hard for me in therapy to connect with him, to understand him, what he was feeling, what he was going through, what he was thinking, because there was just such a, concrete wall of protection around him. Right. And my son gave me an access point where I could see him and see, oh my gosh, that's what an innocent child looks like and feels like and talks like. And thinks like, so that gave me an access point to understanding little Wade. So when I couldn't find that connection, I could imagine my son in an experience similar, and my feelings towards him being, a part of anything like that, whether it was the abuse or just other experiences we went through as children of being not seen and not heard or neglected. So just finding my feelings towards my son being involved in anything like that being so clear. So then being able to say, okay, what would it be like if I could treat myself like that? What would it be like if I could treat little Wade that way and take care of little Wade that way now, So he is my guru, no question, Caroline, with everything you've been through in your personal life, your professional life, everything that's going on now, the work that you're doing, and everything that's on the horizon, what are you hopeful for or about?
I am hopeful that we will continue the work that the Me Too movement really kicked off, right? Which is this idea that, for decades, as we've been living our lives, sexual violence has been taboo to talk about. That's no longer the case. And so I am hopeful that the public awareness about the epidemic of sexual violence, public awareness about the fact that it affects everybody, that it affects, children, boys, girls, gender nonconforming folks. We tend to think of it in, very specific gendered terms, but our greater understanding of who experiences sexual violence, how prevalent it is, and what some of the root causes are, that awareness will have a lasting effect on survivors. So it might not reduce rates of sexual violence, because I don't think, for all social movements, There are really two big stages. One is where you raise awareness, and the second stage, if it's going to be effective, is where you capitalize on that and you put in mechanisms of accountability. I think the movement has successfully raised awareness, but it has fallen apart when it comes to that second piece of accountability. We don't see greater accountability in Hollywood. We don't see greater accountability in law enforcement. We don't see greater accountability on college campuses that's translating into better data, right? I would say that I'm not hopeful that the Me Too movement has been effective in terms of accountability, but I'm very hopeful in that enough people have seen things that they cannot unsee. And so enough of us are speaking up that it's become normal to speak up, even if we're doing it anonymously in online forums or it's a stranger who's contacting Lili. Enough of us are speaking up that the culture has to shift. We will reach a breaking point where we do put in mechanisms of accountability. It is a matter of time, simply because there are enough survivors who know that it's not their fault. There are enough survivors who feel inspired by your work, Wade, James, and Lili. There are enough survivors who will come forward, who will use their voice in order to say that we need a new system. We need to move away from rape culture. And I just, thinking about your sons and their age, at some level, you must know now that you have sons who are the age that you were when you were so horribly violated, that it absolutely was not your fault. It just was not your fault. And if survivors enough survivors, I think, have gotten that message, that it's not our fault, that it's not something that we should bear and carry shame around, and that we see role models who let us use our voices. I don't know how you can put, the lid back on this box. So I'm very hopeful that the sheer volume of survivors and the power of the voices of survivors speaking up now means that we will have mechanisms of accountability at some point in the near future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caroline. What about you, Lili? What are you hopeful for?
I piggyback on all that, but I'm hopeful that I guess when I look at the four of us here, and we all are so maybe visually different, but we're coming together in this wonderful way where we really understand one another, where we feel really connected by the strings between our hearts, that other survivors will be so fortunate, as are the four of us here, to find solace, to find strength, to find comfort in one another. And that's my hope. Yes.
To step into this experience of siblinghood with both of you is incredible and an honor. Thank you for that. Even just this moment,
Yeah. I just want to send a thank you to both of you, and just a warm love. And I don't have to say it, but I believe you, I hear you, and I love you. And thank you.
Back at you, James and Wade. Such an honor, such a privilege. Yeah.
Love y'all. Thank you.
Love you too. Thank you.
This is From Trauma
to Triumph.